Hello there, and welcome back to our Orlando time-lapse series. In today's 30th episode, we continue where we left off by further constructing the confectionery building. Last time you could see me constructing this facade here and defining all of those major components that it has, and today our job is to bring now this one facade on all of those three ones so that we end up with one coherent building in the end. So before I dig a little bit deeper into the fine details on this building, let me explain why there was another unexpected long break between the last video and this one. And to make it short, I got again ill and you could literally hear my voice crumbling down in the last segments of the last video. And it's just so annoying. I mean, you want to record something, but you literally can't do that because your voice sounds like absolute crap. And it's not only that, I mean, it's also on the other side, there were so many things happening in my day job that distracted me away. And I don't know, those 2 last months, they just feel very unproductive and we barely make here any progress at all. And I also don't want to make this too long here. I just hope it gets better in the future. And so we start today on those very awful awnings, I have to say. They are easily the most difficult part here on this building. The thing that makes it so difficult was also a little bit the inability of using any pistons here. When I say inability, I of course tried it out before that to create it with pistons, but it's just way too inconvenient and it just doesn't really work in the way I'm used to building. When you are within a piston, the behavior of the advanced move tool is completely different, and especially if you are working on a non-orthogonal site here that is not aligned to the world axis. So when constructing it now, it came down to the geometry of this window. You can see that we have like this hexagonal shape here, and where I have to match the corner points of the awning to the ones that you see on the window itself. So once I aligned them, I had here a resulting slope, and therefore I had to build now this bottom section that you see where you have like a little ramp there to make up for that, let's say, intolerance. So until here I was quite happy with the result. The only thing that followed now was the creation of the textile pattern on those side panels. And maybe that's the most difficult part on this awning. In order to keep this textile pattern up on those side panels, I couldn't really use any arch shapes anymore because they get so thin where you lose the accuracy at some point. And so therefore I switched later on to wooden columns on this side panel. It works so much better to keep this pattern going, and the only thing is then the wooden texture that you see when you are really up close. When you are a little bit more far away, you just don't notice that. As I'm seeing this footage right next to the reference image, I have to say that the coloring is a little bit off. In the reference image you have a lot less yellow happening and more of that red and green pattern. So I can easily see myself tweak that in the future. That's kinda the great thing, we can always come back to this and change it to a color preset that we like the most. But I also say this because when you take a look on many different reference images, the building is changing. Sometimes you don't have any awnings at all, and sometimes the same awnings have a very different coloring on it. When you think back to 1971, where the park first opened, I'm very certain that they had a lot different awnings back then than the park has right now. But right here you get into some territory where I feel it's unwise to make yourself too dependent on how something looked like at the exact moment in time. Surely it's great to know that, how something looked like back then, but is it really that important and useful to us to stick so highly historical accurate, if you will? I don't think so. And therefore I would say here, we always try to stay accurate, but with the added freedom that we might change it to our own liking and what looks good in this game. I feel like you could fill an entire episode only about this topic, what might look good in this game. I mean, there are many aspects of this, I feel like. But for me, the most crucial one is to adapt to the visual style of the game itself. When you take a look on Planet Coaster, everything you see goes more into that semi-realistic and cartoonish vibe. Every guest that you are seeing in your park has a lot of simplified characteristics about their appearance. And the same goes also for shops, rides and scenery. They are detailed, but they are not super realistic. So my belief is, if you adapt to that visual style of the game, everything should blend into each other. It looks good because it imitates being part of the game itself, of the franchise of Planet Coaster. So that's one part of it. Another part is our own perception. Everything that we are doing in this game constantly happens on a 2D surface in front of us on a screen. And so all the time we are creating something here, you will see it with your own very two eyes. You are bound to this very conical perspective. When you compare it how you perceive this place in reality, it's a whole different story. In reality, your eyes move constantly through different focal points that you see. Some are very close and some are very far away. But when you look on the screen in front of you, the screen distance is always the same. Of course, the image that you see on the screen itself makes the appearance that you see something in 3D space, but it's a pure illusion in some way. So to come back to our topic, I think it's valuable and to be aware of that, of how people perceive a video game or in general visuals on a screen in front of them. And maybe we can use that knowledge later on when picking certain perspectives where you see the park and where it makes a very good looking appearance to us. So you see, it's a very interesting topic, I feel like, and we might talk a little bit more extended about that in the future. So to quickly comment what you see in the footage, I finished now the construction of the awning that you saw, and the last thing that we still have to create before we get going to finish up this building is the creation of this little column for the colonnade. Later on, once I finish this column, I go through the whole facade to re-optimize the scenery groups so that we are able to select the whole facade here, which is roughly over 4,000 pieces, and then we copy it over 2 times so that we have the full building then in place. Just to let you know, I cut out a little bit of footage of this, let's say, optimization process of those scenery groups. It took me nearly half an hour only to do that, so I don't feel like you really have to watch that. But I just like to mention it here because sometimes you see some confusing cuts there because of that. But at this stage, maybe we start talking about another topic. As of recording, today is the 3rd of September. And literally yesterday, Frontier released their latest highlight video about the next update, update 7, which will release on the 16th of September. That's not even 2 weeks from today. So I was quite a bit surprised about that. I did not really expected any announcement of any update in this month. I thought they fully focus on the end of October. Especially because last week they mentioned that they step away from regular monthly unlocked streams. And so I thought, in combination with this little hinting image where you see a person in the foreground with a spooky shirt on, I thought, okay, they go now full for the Halloween themed update. But never mind. I mean, we now have the announcement that the 7th update comes in literally 13 days from now, and there are really some very interesting things within it. I feel like the most crucial one for us as builders here is the new ability that you can rotate grid pieces in any direction. I mean, on paper it sounds so dull and like secondary, and it doesn't really make the appearance that it really is maybe the most important change ever. maybe only topped off by the scalability feature. But for puristic builders, since 2016 and 17, back in Planet Coaster 1, I dreamed about that you could finally rotate those grid pieces. I mean, that was always the thing. You have so many items in the game and roughly half of it is unusable. You can't use that. Whenever I see an item in the browser right now and you have like this grid background there, I know I never will use this piece. I couldn't bother less if it's there or not. Especially in the prequel, there were certain objects there that you just couldn't use. But they were so unique and they would fit so perfectly to whatever you wanted to create there, that it at some times frustrated the hell out of me. You could already envision it, how you would construct it in the game, but the game would just not let you do that. Only because you had this in-game limitation always there. And to see it now getting seemingly so easily removed, and literally 2 weeks from now, I don't know if I should be absolutely euphoric or if I should cry in my little corner. I must certainly make this way too emotional rant here, but it's just a thing. If you played this game that long, always with that limitation in the back of your head, then it gets almost part of you. And I can already see that it will completely change the way how I construct things in this game. I mean, so far every grid piece that I saw, it was unusable. When it's suddenly usable in every direction, who knows what is now possible? I'm certain that I'm not alone with that. I mean, all great content creators out there, so people like Mineral or Moomin Little Socks, I'm sure that you guys feel the same way. And by the way, if you are a creator yourself as you are watching this, just write a little comment about that, because this is a topic I'm so stoked about and very interested how you guys feel about that. Whenever I thought of grid pieces in this game, I thought of them as very, let's say, beginner-friendly pieces. You can create buildings in a very simplistic manner without knowing the specific controls how you place things in this game. And therefore even a beginner that never played Planet Coaster has a much easier time when they first start on their very own building. And especially for those console players out there who have to work with a controller, it makes sense to have there some grid where you place your objects along. So in those instances where it guides and helps the player when constructing something, it's absolutely great to have that. But again, if it's there and it limits our own creative freedom by locking certain accesses or the scale functionality, it becomes of course an issue for the more advanced player. But to conclude now this little topic here, it's of course so great that we in 2 weeks no longer have this limitation here, and I can't imagine even what people come up with. I mean, so far in this little video they made, they only rotated there some very simple buildings so that they look like they would be hit by an earthquake or something like that. But I'm pretty sure that you can think so much more around the box here. And especially in the terms of how you create now a building to use it for specific building techniques, I think this will be most interesting. Because remember, whenever you are creating something like this building here, currently there are no grid elements on it. So every item that you see here is a non-griddable object. Let's say I would like to move now this facade and slightly rotate it around 10 degrees. What happens then is that I'm no longer on the world axis. So whenever I want to select now an object on my facade, when I want to move it, I can only move it with the local pivot. But if I select now multiple objects on this facade and I try to move them, then he gives me an interpolated local pivot that is most certainly not aligned with the object itself. And therefore, to avoid that, we always like to work on the world axis. Especially if you are doing a lot of mirroring, where you have to copy something from the left to the right, that's exactly where we like to use the world axis for. But let's assume that you would like to do that on a non-world axis as well. I believe that you can do that within the next update when you use grid elements. Because one thing about those grid elements is when you are within a grid element, you have there a different local pivot than you would have normally. And this grid pivot, let's call it, is always dependent on the grid itself. That means if you select the multiple objects within this grid, it doesn't give you the local pivot, but instead it gives you the grid pivot. And therefore it acts like a world axis in some way that you can realign to your desire. And I can't envision the amount of situations where this could be super helpful. So for example, I worked on Space Mountain in Planet Coaster 1, and at some point I built the tunnel area around the lift hill. And suddenly I noticed that there's really something wrongly built within it. It was like a ledge or something in there that was not perfectly placed in the right position. Yeah, guess what? I had to pick that thing and realign it to the world axis. And that meant I had to go through there, rotate it around 20 times to get it exactly aligned with the world axis again, only to make that small change. And then to position that whole thing again in the same relative position in the lift hill. I mean, it was absolutely ridiculous. And so something like this would be now completely irrelevant. You would place down your grid element, align it to your lift hill in this scenario, and then you can move every object that you have there alongside this grid. At least based on my understanding of how those grid elements work in the game until this point, it should work like that. But of course, you never can be 100% sure on this, and we certainly have to try it out for ourselves in 2 weeks. So once the update releases, I will of course check it out and tell you then my experience in those episodes. But so far, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves here. We still have to talk about the other features that come along with the 7th update. So another great thing about the next update are those path improvements. From then on, you will be able to place down your path directly on top of the landscape. That means if your landscape is already terraformed, the path will conform onto it. And that's of course great to make much more organic builds, and where your path maybe goes to a very natural landscaping. Another great change to those paths is that you will have the option of setting the corner type. So much more what you would see like in Roller Coaster Tycoon 1 and 2. Right now, you would have to do the extra effort in creating those path tiles by your own. So you would go into the path tool, edit there the individual polygons on one, and then you would copy them over and put them exactly right next to each other. At least that was the old school techie 3D way, and where you then just toggle on and off this setting. Until this point, I'm still a little bit inexperienced with the whole path thing in this game. At some point we dig that a little bit deeper, but right now I can't tell you everything about it just because I barely used it. But to come back now to the update, there's also another thing coming to those paths, and that's the ability that you can then recolor every path type that you have here to your liking. And that's of course great for realism. When you use, for example, one path texture multiple times in your park on different areas, you can alter the color very slightly each time, and this should help with the repetition that is happening. Or maybe you can use the asphalt texture, for example, as your soil bed for certain natural arrangements. And so it's absolutely great that you have this added creative freedom there to just change the color, and there you have it. I mean, in general, to have this option of changing the color, it's so underrated, I feel like. When you really use that on purpose, you can give a scene a complete different emotional impact. It's one of those things when you look on something, it kinda plays with your own senses. If something is red or blue, it impacts your own feeling on the temperature. Although there is no temperature changing whatsoever, it's simply due to the color of it. And so to come back to this update, it's of course a vital change here that will be especially useful also for players that don't want to spend now the extra effort of creating a customly designed flooring. So to conclude it until here, for me, out of those changes, the most crucial one is of course that you can now rotate all those grid objects in every direction. But alongside those changes, they also want to introduce now this new game mode, how you play the game, the challenge mode. A little bit of that was shown in the Unlocked stream, and I feel like the last 2 episodes I talked very much about all of those topics. I won't do that right now. It's just the thing that they bring now this new game mode in action. My personal hope here is that this new game mode kinda drags new people into this game. I mean, we don't have to talk around it here. There's certainly a lack of players in this game when you compare it to the prequels and especially Planet Zoo. And therefore it's always great if there are some new things in the game that could have an impact on that, where you could see an increase of players. I feel like that the game right now in its current state is at a very good spot in the terms of its own quality of what you get when you first buy it. So right now I don't believe that there are any people out there that just not play the game purely out of the reason that the game's quality is lacking here. Maybe only in the terms if you play the game like a real management sim, where maybe the quality of the actual management side of the game is lacking. This could very well be the case, I don't know. I never played this game as a pure management sim. And the only other reason I can think of is just the missing knowledge that the game got way improved over time. Maybe the bad release really scared off some people that would be otherwise very open for this genre, but I can only suspect 1 or 2 things, either because they refunded it already or they just don't know about it anymore. They don't get notified in any way. I mean, once you had your release on Steam, you never get that much attention anymore. Maybe only during a summer sale or something like that. But regardless of how you going to sell the game now, does it really fix the problem of lacking players? I don't think so. Even if you have there a small percentage of players that just bought the game, they play it for 1 or 2 weeks, but after it, they abandon it. I mean, surely it's great to get the earnings of the game itself there, but I suspect that the amount of players that are like that is very small. So in my belief, the goal must be to find a way how you can increase this player base that is attached to your game. I think the most natural and effective way how you can achieve that is by the players themselves. Every one of us got into this franchise in some way. Maybe your friend told you about it, or you saw it on Steam, or even you watched your favorite content creator creating a very unique creation that you liked. And so now you probably want to try it out on your own. And there you are. That's your story, how you got into this game. And that's kinda the thing, that how you approach this game heavily relies on its representation online. And in my belief, the biggest impact on that is by content creators. They're not only showcasing what can be built within this game, but they also telling their very own story alongside that. That's what I believe makes the whole thing so interesting to watch. It blends those 2 things together and it gives it a own unique flavor. It's not only Planet Coaster and I as a player, but it's actually the third guy who you can interact with. And therefore, I as a player and viewer at the same time, I'm not only addicted to this creator, but also addicted to the game itself. So in my opinion, it only makes sense to push this side of the representation of the game to gain more players. But apart from those creators who make, I would say, 95% of what you see online, You barely have any representation of Frontier themselves, I feel like. Surely you have the main channel where they upload those highlights from the updates and also shorts from time to time, but other than that, there isn't really that much. I just miss here like a weekly FAQ stream or something like that, where you can get in touch with them and to have a frequent meeting point for the community. That's just missing in some way. And we always have as a community to wait for their unlocked stream or another announcement of them. And what better place would it be than on their own channel and stream, for example? Another thing that comes to my mind is also the workshop. I mean, you have of course the Frontier workshop in the game, but you always have to start the game to look it up. I know that you can go to the official website of them and to also see it there, but literally who does that? Back in Planet Coaster 1 it was so much more conveniently to have there the Steam workshop. You could not only showcase their multiple images and videos of the creation, but you could properly interact there by writing comments and giving a like and to really get in touch with the creator. So this could be also another reason why Planet Coaster 2 is not so visible. When the workshop can only be accessed within the game itself, it locks out every player that does not have the game. And that's of course a huge issue. Whenever you have a new player that might want to buy the game, he doesn't really see what you can create with it. And so very hopefully he comes eventually across 1 or 2 videos of some creator that drags him in. So to conclude now, that the representation side of the game is, I feel like, the most effective way how you can get players into this game. And the only other way I can think of is by advertising the game on Steam itself. But apart from those two things, I don't know how players really get into this game. Maybe we just have to wait and see what happens. I mean, the game constantly improves over time. That's always a great thing. And sometimes it can also happen that a game gets rediscovered. So to finally conclude now this topic, I feel it's not about the developer here or the game itself or even the players themselves. I feel it's purely about the missing visibility of the game itself. When you don't see it, you aren't aware of it, that it even exists. That's just the pure simple reason I feel like is happening. Having said that, I just hope that we will get much more players in this game, especially, and there we make the turn back to the update, in the very last frames you saw a very, let's say, creepy or spooky-ish image that hints us already to the next big thematic pack that is coming. I think that it's safe to assume that the next big update will feature the spooky pack. It makes absolutely sense so shortly before Halloween. And I feel like if you stick to those events that you have throughout the year, you can't really do anything wrong there. All people are in that mood at that time and they are much more likely to build there also something very spookish. And so for example, for Christmas, I would expect that they also make there a seasonal update that features maybe finally the integration of snow also in this game. But at this stage I would like to return now to the build. We made here an enormous progress in the last 20 minutes. When I had those 3 facades now in place, the thing I was a little bit afraid of was the perfect positioning of them. For example, if you take a look on the area image, you will see that the whole building is not perfectly in the middle of the corner itself. It's slightly off. And this little detail has some consequences, because later on when I'm constructing then the buildings right next to this building, the distance to this facade here changes and also the depth of it. And therefore if that building is not exactly in the place it has to be, it affects the layouting of all those other buildings around it. So I measured out in before with my rulers the perfect location of this building so that we are really bulletproof, let's say. Another thing was that on the base floor of this building, on all 3 sides you have a different facade happening. On the left one, the facade pulls itself outwards. On the right one, the facade pulls inwards. And on the middle one, you have a rounded facade. So especially creating now this rounded facade, it was a little bit difficult. I used here a piston for the symmetry. It's way easier if you only have to do one side. But still you have to create the curvature piece by piece. And if you have there like a little dent in this curvature, you will see that immediately. So I had to work here very accurately to make that happening. After all, each piece that you see is normally a very flat surface. And so to make now the illusion that it's actually rounded like in reality, it's a bit tricky. So when I constructed now this basement floor, I already started on thinking about how to make now the interior of this building later on. As you see me constructing the exterior here the whole time, I do not really pay attention to the thickness of the wall material or the shell of the building. This blue facade that you see here is in reality a lot thinner by itself, and you see it of course from both sides, from outside and inside. So when making now the interior, a major part of that will be to re-optimize all the elements on the outside that you see from the inside. At least here on this facade, I do not really know how to do that. I mean, I would have to look up now pieces that are really thin, or where we have to use some art pieces now in a ridiculous amount on a very super small scale setting. What I feel like, especially for this building and its great of importance for the park, and because it has those great wide and open windows where you can see through, this would be a prime example of an amazing interior. Very recently I looked up the latest video from Mineral. Whenever I watch his videos, how he creates this amazing stuff, I mean, he has such a great talent of creating realistic buildings and telling a story through creating a certain atmosphere of a place. So he's currently working on this 50 to 60s midway budget desert park. So if you haven't checked him out already, please do, because he is a prime example of what I talked earlier, of creators that can show what you can build within this game. But I mentioned him here especially because in his latest video he creates this really amazing interior space of a almost, I would say, Frank Lloyd Wright building, where you kinda enter a new territory of how to play the game, I would even say. I mean, the original purpose of this game is to have this theme park simulation, but to suddenly see it now being used for creating a super realistic recreation of a architectural building, I mean, it puts a smile on my face. And to see that now being done so masterfully, it kinda makes me think how we deal with that here in the park. Do we really want to go that extreme, or do we have to find here a sweet balance in between that? I say that especially because whenever you are starting now on creating an interior, it kinda sets the tone or the degree of how detailed you are going. Once I set this in the park, people are kinda expecting the same degree all over the park. If you suddenly have there a super basic interior at some place, people will say, wow, that looks a little bit off, right? And so I feel like we have to make very deliberate decisions here on where we want to create an interior and where we say simply, well, today it's closed and we can't do anything about it. Maintenance work. But this excuse, it doesn't really work anymore if we starting on the rides itself. I mean, from here on, it will be a long road until we get to one, but when we are there, we kinda have to set that. As I said in the last episode, my plan is that we first finish all of those buildings that come to the right of this building, and once we have that, we move on to the interior of the railroad station. Then we will have to find our own unique level of detail for all those interior spaces. So to come back now to this corner here, As you see, I'm just placing down now those glass sheets. Since we do not have any rounded glass sheets, I tried my best here of using those rectangular ones. You will see, of course, a little white line there where you have the separation happening, but you only really see that if you're up close. I mean, as I said, when we are doing the interior, people will most likely walk in the guest perspective through the door entrance. So this could be kinda an issue here, but I'm really not sure and also don't know how we fix that really. On the other hand, if we later on have here everything set with the interior done and you can literally see through this building, it could be that you are just so overwhelmed by all the detail that you don't really notice that. So right now I'm building those trim areas on the very top part of this base floor. I feel like they're working here super great because you have then the transition to the ceiling of this colonnade. I mean, sometimes I notice that if you have a building where you also have a colonnade in front of it, if you don't really have there anything in between this area, there's just something missing. And you can see that, I feel like, what it brings now to this facade here. So as we are finishing off this facade here, I would like to talk again about the spooky pack, because I feel like I didn't told you all of my thoughts here, and there's also just a little bit time in between those recording sessions. So I watched the video of them again, and also until now they uploaded only this small portion that you see at the very end. So it says there at the very bottom of the screen, in-game footage contains paid content. And that's of course something I didn't really notice at the first time. It kinda implies here that whatever we see on the screen, something has to be from a future DLC. When you take a closer look on this image, you see a spooky or magical interior, maybe from a dark ride. And when you look through those windows, you see from the outside a very nightly scene where you have the moon up and everything has this vibe attached to it. Now they called this video that they uploaded, Bring a Little Magic to Your Park. And that implies, of course, that whatever we are seeing there is part of a magical pack. When I take a deeper look on those scenery objects that we have in this scene, almost none of them seem familiar to me. I mean, we had back then in the spooky pack candles and vases and kettles that you also see now in this image, but they had a very different look to it. And especially those figures that you see in the middle, where you have like a spider, a fox or an eagle, none of them seem familiar. So the only possible reason I can think of and why it says contains paid content is that we might get the spooky pack, so all elements from the prequel, for free, and the magical pack that we see now currently on the screen mostly is maybe getting sold as a DLC. Now I also have a second theory here. When you take a look to the moon, you see there a silhouette of a coaster. And I saw it a little bit in the comments of those videos that people might suspect that this is a Intermin Blitz coaster. I'm not really too much into that, but I know that people are asking for that literally since the launch. And so the second theory could be that we see this coaster being sold as a DLC, which would be, in my opinion, at least a terrible idea to lock this very popular and desired coaster behind a paywall. I feel like it's a much better idea to have their basic spooky pack and an optional magical pack if you really want that variety of how you create your dark ride. Now there's even a third scenario that could happen if they make the spooky pack and the magical pack as one combined pack that you have to pay for. This would be outrageous and a very bad idea, I feel like. Keep in mind that one of the core features of this game is to create your dark ride. With this sort of lighting in the game, we can create dark rides as realistic as never before. And therefore, if you now lock up one of the most essential themes that exist that only work within a dark ride, it would be so horrendous. So very hopefully we will see one of those two other scenarios happen. And maybe there's even a fourth one that we are unable to make up in this image. So please, if you have any ideas or opinions what this image shows us or what we could expect to see in the future for Planet Coaster, I'm very stoked to hear it. So coming back to our building here, we almost finished it now. We are placing some trash bins, some lanterns, and I also created a fire hydrant, which looks really cool, I have to say. And the one thing that is still left to do for us is to recolor the brickwork of this building. When you take a look right now, without any recoloring, it looks just too new and pristine. Even a little bit lifeless, I would say. And therefore we start recoloring those bricks exactly in the way how they are recolored in the original. So I go through every brick that we see on those reference images to give it the right coloring. Whenever I make something like this, I usually have a tool in the browser where I can select the color value on the screen itself. And so I could exactly pinpoint the color on those bricks that we see in the reference image. But when I transfer then this value in the game, it looks most of the time very far off. And that has multiple reasons. I use two monitors that have different brightness and contrast settings. I of course calibrated them so that they look nearly identical to each other, but still there's always room for tolerances. Then the reference itself, it has a different lighting than the game itself. And also the game itself renders properly those color values on the color picker differently than they actually are. So in the end, I just rely on my own eyesight when comparing those things. Right now, as you see it in the footage, I'm quite happy with the recoloring, although I have to say that the contrast on those dark bricks and the much brighter ones, it's too stark and I can see myself maybe reduce that a little bit in the future. So one thing here at the very end of this video, I would like to introduce like a little outro part of how we end each video here. I mean, so far I had it like that where we have a cinematic at the intro, then I start my usually talk on the episode itself, where you see the big chunk of time-lapse, and then we had just an outro cinematic as well. But now I feel like, and some people mentioned it under the comments, that they would like just a little bit of a recap in real time, where I just go through the park each time and just explain a little bit more how it feels and how it looks, and maybe what we created in that episode. Although I feel like in the time-lapse segment, that's the core foundation of this series, and it has to be so long, because otherwise we wouldn't make here any progress at all. But I surely see, of course, that after that whole tedious process of this time-lapse, you want to see how it actually looks in real time in the park itself. I mean, you see that format on all creators throughout, where they just talk over real-time footage where they stroll to the park itself, and why shouldn't we do it as well here? So as you can see, we are now in the park itself in real time, and I'm just improvising here a little bit. I don't know where we will go with that. We just look around and enjoy. So we see the railroad station here, and I set the timing here to 15 o'clock, and I feel like this time setting gives it a special beauty, and it really makes this park shine. You have those long stretched shadows here, and also the reflection of those glass panels on the railroad station. I mean, absolutely gorgeous, I feel like. And yeah, as we rotate around here, we will see, of course, that we have here this issue where we still have no interior for the railroad station. And it really feels a little bit empty, and it breaks up the immersion of the park right now, since you can see it from very far away even. And therefore we will, in a couple of episodes, care about that. And we also set here the complete interior. We have to break up those walls and set all the pathing in there, and yeah, make that place working in the end. And the main issue that you see also here is that the thickness of the upper floor is way too thick to actually make it realistic so that you can stand in the base level. And that was just the issue, because we couldn't get rid of the foundation of the path itself. And when I move now this ceiling away, you will see the problem. Now that we can just hide it and we can also make the path invisible, we have here full flexibility to make that working in the end. But in general, the whole interior here, also the fencing that you see, it's of course not done yet. But I can only imagine how amazing this will be when we later have the full interior there and also functional, so that we can let people in the park. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about the confectionery. I feel like as you see it now in the park, it looks absolutely stunning. And yeah, I just go through some time settings here. I feel like 9 o'clock is also great. You have much more of that morning vibe. It's maybe the park shortly before opening, and our staff members are doing the last preparations for the day until the park gets opened. This will be of course great to imagine later on when we then have people and they slowly approach themselves until they enter the park. That's another thing that we have to work on later on. You see those side entrance buildings here, they aren't really finished. Also on the roof we will have to do some detailing there. But the thing or the question that we have to ask ourselves is how people are actually entering this park in planned coaster terms. What I mean by that is when we go, for example, for the facilities menu here, we have there 2 tiles that we can use for that. We have here the park entrance tile that functions like a spawner, so there's where our guests will pop in the park. And then we have here our park entrance gate, where people go through and they have to pay their ticket for. And so in theory, I already tested this, it works, people will go through that gate, but it had the side effect that some people would actually hijack themselves into the park by moving beside those side alleys. I don't know how it is right now, I could assume that it's fixed now, but we now have the option of also creating like an invisible barrier beside that with those path options that we have. So I could imagine here a little separation line left and right of this entrance gate, and we just hide that up then with a custom flooring or something like that. But the other thing is of course the guest spawner. So I would place this spawner of course in places that are a little bit hidden, so I could very well imagine directly under this canopy here, or later on when we have the monorail station built. But we will see how we deal with that in the future. The one thing that is just very important to me is that it not only looks like it would be operational, but it actually is. And so in some form we have to deal with those park entrances. But a quick note to those park entrance gates, I would love if we also would have there like an invisible variation of that. I can already see myself having to hide them, and it kinda breaks there a little bit of the immersion. But other than that, let's get back to our little tour, so you can see our confectionery here. In the next episodes we will care about the buildings right next to it. When you see now the Emporium building on the left and the confectionery on the right, they are pretty similar in height, although the confectionery is a little bit higher. But you can already imagine there a little bit like the Main Street that we see later on. And especially the floor that you see right now is so important for the overall atmospheric. Recently I saw a save game of this park where I still had the old asphalt there, and comparing it now to this version that we have, it's like having 2 different parks built here. But maybe at this stage we take a little walk here. As you can see, when you go through this park now in the first person, it has a whole different feeling attached to it. Whenever I'm in the first person, the park feels a lot more hugely than when I'm looking from above, because you can of course see the boundaries around it. But if you're on the guest perspective, you won't really see that, and so it feels more like a walking simulator in some way. What I mean, like this whole thing that you are within a guest perspective, finally in your park, without like in the prequel where you had to enter a cheat code for that same feature. I like it so much, and I finally can also experience the park for yourself. I mean, most of the time, like 95% of the time, you are in this game because you are creating something. And there are barely any times where you really now go into that whole thing and enjoy it purely for the sake of it. And that's exactly the perfect tool to do that. To finally relax a little bit, just stroll around and have fun in watching all what you have built there. It's like a own small little world that you have built. And I just miss that sometimes in some other games, that you barely have there any time to really relax and appreciate what you have there. In most games, it's always grind, and look for the next little satisfaction you can have. And so therefore I like this feature a lot, and it kinda makes me reminiscent about Roller Coaster Tycoon 1 and 2. I know we didn't have there any first person in the game or something like that, but what you had there was the main menu, and whenever you loaded up the game, you saw this vanilla park there shown as it's playing out as a slideshow. And still to this day, I believe it's so fascinating to just watch that, to see so many people there roaming around and wondering what they are going to ride next in your park, and to think yourself into the mind of them. And coming back now to Planned Coaster, wouldn't this be a great, as I said, reminiscent feature when you just take that into this game? Imagine a screensaver that pops up after you are 5 minutes AFK, and you suddenly see their random area shots from your park, and you see it playing out. I would love that so much, because I feel like this side of how you actually experience now your park, it's a little bit underrated. We take so great care and effort into creating all of that, but are we actually also appreciate what we have there? As I said also in many previous episodes, you can do there so much more. If you, for example, introduce sim-like mechanics, that you take control over our own character that is constantly in your own little world here. But I don't want to make this too long here. As we are strolling still around here, I feel like you get now a little picture of how the park itself feels in real time, and we might keep this format going for the future episodes also. It makes kinda sense to show this park in all of those 3 expression methods: cinematics, time-lapse and real-time footage. All of them have different qualities that they bring to the table in order to make an understandable picture of how this park actually looks like. Having said all of that, I feel like it's time to conclude now this episode. We talked about so much today, where I believe we hopefully didn't overwhelm you with anything here. I mean, therefore I have those timestamps. If you feel in any way uncomfortable, just skip ahead then. But yeah, we made enormous progress today on the confectionery. It's set there, it looks gorgeous, I feel like, and in the next episodes we will work on the buildings right next to it. Also, I would like to give here a last word to my own upload schedule. I noticed over the last weeks it's not always that easy to keep up a reliable upload rhythm going. I don't know if I said this already, but I have a day job that I have to care about, and so it's not always easy to work here on 2 different things at the same time. At least over the last few months since I started this whole thing, it worked out most of the time where I could upload between 7 to 10 days. But right now it's a little bit more rough. There's a lot of things going where I sadly just get distracted sometimes, and I don't really find time in between there to properly record anything. And so hopefully in the future this will change a little bit to the better. I really don't want to make here another promise that I can't really hold up. And therefore, whenever you see me not uploading any videos, it's really not because I stopped this whole thing or anything like that. It's just because I didn't really had time to work on it. And the same goes also to my members, who are eagerly awaiting another update to the park file. It's coming, I'm working on it, but I just need a little bit more time for that. So having said all of those things today, this will conclude today's episode. So as always, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, subscribe, like or comment. Consider becoming a member on this channel, join our Discord server, Watch my other videos about Anaheim or Orlando, and thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.